Rome is a city that has seen its fair share of backstabbing and betrayals. There's no place for the weak-willed here. In order to survive in the Eternal City, you need to be tougher than the Colosseum, more cunning than the emperors themselves. In this time of turmoil, one man emerged as a beacon of hope for the Roman people, a true blue-blooded leader who seemed destined for greatness. They called him Germanicus, and he was everything Rome dreamed of in an emperor. Noble, brave, handsome, and adored by both the army and the people. Born into the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Germanicus was the great-nephew of Augustus and the adopted son of Emperor Tiberius. He had taken the throne after Augustus, the first emperor, had died, but unlike Augustus, Tiberius had never shown much interest in ruling. Even though he had been groomed for power his whole life, he liked nothing more than tending to his gardens in his private villa on the island of Capri, far away from the dirty business of running an empire. As such, he delegated much of the ruling to his advisors and friends. They threw dirt and dust on their heads and tore at their clothes, wailing for their beloved Germanicus. He sent his Praetorian guards after Agrippina, but they simply joined the mourners instead. The emperor then ordered Germanicus' name to be removed from temples and public buildings, and banned anyone from speaking kindly of him. But this only fueled the flames of resentment. It was clear to everyone what he was doing, punishing the widow and covering up his crime. In the forum, Agrippina gathered the crowds and proclaimed her late husband innocent, blaming Tiberius and his advisors for murdering him. Tacitus, who was exiled for criticizing the Flavians, was probably more neutral, but he still wrote under the shadow of the emperor. As such, there are very few primary sources that tell the story of the Julio-Claudian dynasty without an agenda. So historians are left to sift through what little information we do have, trying to find the truth. Now that the whole city was openly blaming him for the death of Germanicus, he became a prisoner in his own palace, unable to leave without being pelted with rocks and insults. Others argue that it was all a plot by Tiberius to get rid of his nephew, who was indeed a threat to his power, since the people loved him and hated the emperor. But their grip on power was constantly challenged by revolts and assassinations. The dynasty ended with the infamous Nero, who murdered his own mother and drove Rome into the ground. The thing is, both may be right. Perhaps Sejanus really did want to be emperor, and he convinced Tiberius to get rid of Germanicus. But perhaps Tiberius was also happy to get rid of his nephew since he too wanted to keep the throne for himself. Sejanus fared no better, committing suicide in his villa outside the city. When news broke that Tiberius had died and her father-in-law had taken the throne, Agrippina emerged from hiding with her sons, now calling them Germanicus and Caligula, the names of their deceased father and uncle. Both boys had been trained for power since birth and were ready to ascend to the throne. As the people grew bolder, they stormed the palace and pulled down Tiberius' statues, melted down his gold coins, and even dug up the urn containing his ashes, scattering them to the winds. She pointed to Sejanus, who had come to pay his respects to the dead Germanicus, and accused him directly of poisoning the wine. After 23 years of rule, the Julio-Claudians were finished, and a new dynasty would take over the empire. Or were they? You see, while Agrippina had taken Germanicus' body back to Rome, she never actually held a funeral for him. That's because she believed that if she let his body rest, it would mean giving up hope for his return. This would have been unthinkable behavior in any other circumstances. But Rome was a city in mourning, and Sejanus, knowing that he was the main suspect, fled. One of these trusted men was Sejanus, the prefect of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus was ambitious, ruthless, and extremely jealous of Germanicus, who got more popularity in a single campaign than Sejanus had in a lifetime. Many believed him to be the new Augustus, a shining example of Roman virtue, and the man who would bring Rome into a new golden age. In 19 AD, Tiberius ordered Germanicus back to Rome, stripping him of his command. Germanicus returned obediently, kissing his adoptive father's hand and swearing undying loyalty. But when he stepped off the boat, he knew something was wrong. The crowd that had come to greet him was unusually silent, and his adoptive father didn't even bother to show up. Something was rotten in the Eternal City, but Germanicus couldn't know that yet. He looked the part, too. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Germanicus was tall and athletic with reddish-gold hair and a flowing beard. The king of Armenia had died and Tiberius appointed Germanicus as his replacement, so she did the only thing she could. She took her husband's ashes back to Rome. Along the way, she gathered his scattered supporters and built them back up. Then she made the journey to the city in a funeral procession that grew larger by the day, attracting more and more followers until it was clear to anyone who cared to look that this was you and just a funeral. It was a revolution. While everyone else was excited, Germano was suspicious. And for good reason. When he arrived in Armenia, he fell gravely ill. No amount of medicine could cure him, and his condition worsened, until he finally whispered to his wife, Agrippina, the elder, that he had been poisoned, that it was a slow-acting poison that had been put in his wine on the orders of Tiberius. Then he died. But it wasn't just his good looks that made him so appealing. And so the future emperor set out to conquer not with armies, but with charm. The Germans loved him, and when he left their lands to take on the Carusi tribe, they came with him, riding in war chariots alongside Roman soldiers, fighting shoulder to shoulder against the Germanic tribes. It was also his ability to connect with common folk, riding through the streets of Rome in a regular chariot instead of a golden one, eating in taverns and brothels rather than with senators and patricians. So technically, Germanicus wasn't supposed to be conquering it. When word of his successes reached Rome, the Senate expressed their displeasure and recalled Germanicus, hoping to soothe things over with the Germans by offering them ambassadorships in the Senate. But now that the grateful Germanic tribes heard that Rome wanted to make peace, they thought it was because they were afraid of the Roman-German coalition led by Germanicus, and so they refused, asking for Germanicus to stay and secure their borders. Seeing as the entire point of being a client king was to be protected by Rome, this request wasn't unreasonable, but Rome saw it as a challenge to their authority, and so they refused, much to the dismay of Germanicus. He was even known to stop and help mothers cross the street, serenading them with songs from Greek poetry. The common people of Rome loved him, but so did the powerful elite and, most importantly, the military. In 19 AD, at the ripe young age of 23, Germanicus was given command of the entire Roman province of Germania. But there was a problem. Rome had always considered Germania a client kingdom, not a province. The emperor at this point was Tiberius, Germanicus' adoptive father and uncle by blood. Sejanus convinced Tiberius that Germanicus was trying to usurp the throne, and slowly but surely, the emperor began to believe him. So he went home to recuperate and waited for his next assignment, which came sooner than expected. Agrippina immediately wrote to Tiberius, demanding an investigation, but her letter was ignored. The citizens of Rome wept as the procession made its way through the city. When Tiberius heard about the accusations, he was furious. Tiberius tried to restore order, but his authority was gone, and so the first Julio Claudian emperor died, hated and alone. She had children with Germanicus, 2 boys, Gaius and Lucius, and she kept them hidden away in a villa near Naples, pretending that they were her nephews. Now, how much of this is true is hard to say, because most of what we know about this period comes from sources that were clearly biased against the Julii, particularly Suetonius and Cassius Dio. Some believe that Sejanus really was a power-hungry manipulator who framed Germanicus for treason in order to get rid of him and eventually usurp the throne for himself. What's certain is that the Julio Claudians would go on to rule for another 27 years, bringing the empire to unprecedented heights. But if you want to learn more about Rome's first royal family, check out my videos on Augustus and Tiberius. Thanks for watching.